Good morning. Happy Father's Day. I've spent a lot of my life working and taking directions from my dad on and off the clock. When you work that closely with your father, sharing the same stretch of land, or trying to muscle a project into shape, you hear a lot of things. But there's one phrase, one specific tone of voice that every son or daughter knows instantly. It's the moment when you try to cut a corner, maybe you try to haul entirely too much weight in one trip, or you decide to rig up a piece of equipment in the way the manufacturer definitely did not intend. And your dad steps in, shuts the whole operation down, and says, "Boy, are you out of your mind?" There was one time when I wasn't working. I was a kid. I was maybe 8 years old. And I just did not like the way that my body looked. I thought, I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to drop 100 pounds. I was 8 years old. And my idea, because our house sat at the foot of a hill, my idea was to take our little red wagon and load it down with cinder blocks and everything and walk up and down the hill with it. Halfway up the first trip, my dad jumps in. He says, "Boy, what are you doing?" So I explained to him, and he's like, "Just stop." So when we are younger, the phrase feels like a harsh criticism. It feels like our independence is being attacked. But looking back, you realize that a father's exasperation is just love with the volume turned up. He sees the whole blueprint, and we're just looking at the next nail. Earthly fathers ask us if we're out of our minds to stop us from relying on our own flawed logic. They want to protect us. But as we grow in faith, the Heavenly Father flips the phrase entirely. He doesn't just want us to stop our flawed logic. He wants us to abandon it completely. He wants us to literally get out of our minds and step into His. And when we do that, the rest of the world is going to look at us like we're completely insane. The past 2 weeks we've been studying on Ruth, and the first chapter is just kind of stuck with me. So I'm just going to highlight what we've been through, starting in the first chapter, 16th verse. Just kind of paraphrasing, it says, "But Ruth said, 'Don't force me to leave you. Don't make me go home. Where you go, I will go, and where you live, I'll live. Your people will be my people. Your God is my God. Where you die, I'll die, and that's where I'll be buried. So help me God, not even death is going to come between us.'" When Naomi saw that Ruth had her heart set on going with her, she gave in. And so the two of them traveled together back to Bethlehem. If you remember, Naomi has lost her husband and her sons. She is broke. She is grieving. She has nothing left to offer. She looks at her daughters-in-law and tells them the logical thing that a parent could say in this situation. Go back, save yourselves. You have your whole lives ahead of you. Orpah does the logical thing. She does the math, she cuts her losses, and she leaves. But Ruth refuses. She says she'll plant her feet and she'll go where you go, or where she'll go. And she'll stay where Naomi stays. Any bystander in Moab watching this young woman chain her future to a widow would look at Ruth and say, "Girl, are you out of your mind?" It doesn't make sense on a spreadsheet, but Ruth operates on a fierce, illogical loyalty. Ruth shows us that radical loyalty looks like insanity to the rest of the world. But what happens when the Heavenly Father hands you a blueprint that makes absolutely no sense to anyone else? Go back to Genesis 6. God looks at Noah and gives him a construction project. God tells Noah to build an ark, and not just a little boat, a massive 3-story vessel. But here's the logic problem. Noah is on dry land. he is miles from a body of water. And a weather event of this magnitude has never happened before in human history. Imagine being on that job site every single day. Noah is hauling lumber, pitching the wood, following the blueprint to a T, and every single neighbor that walks by that job site definitely called out to Noah, "Noah, you're out of your mind!" Human logic says that you build for the weather that you see. Noah had to build for the weather God promised. When you're following the Father's blueprint, you have to ignore the critics who are looking at the current forecast. Noah had to build for rain that wasn't there yet. Generations later, a prophet named Elijah had the exact opposite problem. He had trusted the Father so much that he intentionally sabotaged his own project. In 1 Kings chapter 18, Elijah is in a showdown with the prophets of Baal. They're trying to see whose God will answer with fire from heaven. If you've ever built a campfire, you know the first rule of making a fire is to keep your wood dry. But Elijah is operating outside of human logic. He builds his altar, he digs a trench around it, and then looks at his guys that's helping him and says, "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and the wood." Then he says, "Do it again." And then they do it a third time. The prophets of Baal are probably laughing. The guys carrying the water definitely are thinking, "Man, are you out of your mind? You need a spark and you're making a swamp." But Elijah knew exactly what he was doing. If the wood was dry, people could claim it was a trick, a lucky lightning strike, a hidden ember. But by soaking the wood, Elijah made it impossible for anyone but God to get the credit. Sometimes the Father asks us to do things that make 0 sense on our blueprint. Specifically, when that fire falls, everyone knows exactly who did it. Elijah soaked the wood because he trusted God's fire. Centuries later, Peter had to step away from wood entirely because he trusted God's Son. In Matthew 14, the disciples are out on a boat in the middle of a raging storm, and Jesus comes walking to them on the water. Now the disciples are in a boat using human logic. The boat is tossing, the waves are crashing, and it's made of wood. Wood floats. Humans don't. Human logic says that you stay behind the barrier and hold on for dear life. But Peter says, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come out to you on the water." To walk on the water, Peter literally had to get out of his own mind. He had to abandon the physics that he understood his entire life. As long as he stayed out of his own head, he could do the impossible. But by the 30th verse of Matthew 14, "But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink. He cried out, 'Lord, save me.'" The exact second that Peter shifted back into his own logical mind, when he started noticing the wind, calculating the danger, realizing how crazy this was, he started to sink. And how often do we do that? We step out in faith, but we start over-engineering our lives, and then we start sinking. Peter learned that day that surviving a storm meant abandoning his own logic. Years later, a man named Paul would take the exact same lesson and stand in front of the government and be accused of the exact same thing. This brings us to Acts chapter 26. Paul is standing trial in chains before Governor Festus and King Agrippa. He is defending his life. Paul used to be wealthy, powerful, highly respected Pharisee. He had it all. But he gave up his elite status, his comforts, and his money because he met the resurrected Jesus on the road to Damascus. Right in the middle of Paul's passionate defense, Festus just can't take anymore. He interrupts the trial. And in the 24th verse, Festus shouts the title of the sermon. He says, "You're out of your mind, Paul. Your great learning is driving you absolutely insane." Think about it from Festus's perspective. From a worldly view, Festus is right. Who trades a respected life for beatings and shipwrecks and chains? Who gives up everything for a crucified carpenter? It doesn't make sense to the world. And Paul is not offended. He responds calmly that he is speaking the reasonable truth. He even calls out to King Agrippa. It says Agrippa knows that he's speaking the truth. Because Paul knows a secret. He writes it down for us later in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 16. He tells the church, but we have the mind of Christ. When your earthly father asks you, are you out of your mind? He's trying to save you from a mistake. When the world asks you, are you out of your mind? It usually means you are finally doing something right. It means you've stopped building your life with the world's broken logic, and you've started building with the Father's blueprint. If you are fiercely loyal when it makes no sense, the world will say you're out of your mind. If you build the ark before the rain falls, they'll say you're out of your mind. If you soak the wood or step out of the boat, they will call you absolutely crazy. Our response to the world should be exactly the same as Paul's. We aren't operating on flawed human logic anymore. We have the mind of Christ. So when the world looks at how you are living, how you are loving, and how you are building, and asks, boy, are you out of your mind? You can look right back and say, I sure hope so.